The Adirondacks in October are a dying place. Not in any poetic sense, the trees genuinely look like they are bleeding out, hemorrhaging red and amber into the soil, and by late afternoon the light drops so fast it feels less like sunset and more like something pulling a curtain closed from the other side. Marcus and I had been walking since dawn, 8 miles into the interior, far past the last trail register, far past the point where cell service was anything more than a rumor. We were exactly where we wanted to be. That was before we understood what it meant to be wanted back. We found the first prints around 2 in the afternoon, on a stretch of soft mud running parallel to a creek we'd been following north. Marcus spotted them and stopped walking so abruptly I walked into his pack. He didn't say anything. He just pointed down. Boot prints. Deep, fresh, the tread pattern pressed cleanly into the gray mud like a signature. We looked at each other and looked behind us down the trail. Nothing. No sound except the creek moving over its cold black rocks. No wind. The pines were absolutely still in the way that pines in deep wilderness sometimes are, not peaceful, but attentive, the way an audience goes quiet before something begins. We told ourselves what reasonable people tell themselves. Another hiker. Someone ahead of us on the trail, moving fast, maybe just around the next bend. We listened for footsteps and heard none, but that meant little enough. Sound does strange things in the mountains. We kept walking. The second set of prints stopped us completely. They were 40 yards ahead, around a gentle curve in the trail where the mud reappeared after a long stretch of exposed root and stone. Same boots. Same tread. Same depth, suggesting the same approximate weight. Marcus crouched down and measured the stride length with his forearm the way his father had taught him to measure things in the field. He looked up at me and his face had gone the color of the mud. The stride was identical to ours. Not similar. Identical, as though someone had studied the precise mechanics of how we walked, the slight inward roll of Marcus's left foot, the way I tend to push off harder on the right, and replicated it without a single deviation. But here is what neither of us said out loud, not then, not until we were much further away and far less certain that speaking it might summon something. The prints in front of us were facing the same direction we were traveling. Whoever had made them had not been coming toward us. They had been walking our route before us, as though they had known, with a confidence that felt obscene in its precision, exactly where we were going to go. We made camp before dark. That was our first mistake. The human voice is a deeply personal thing. We recognize it before we recognize faces, before we register names, operating on some frequency below conscious thought. A tuning fork struck in infancy that resonates for the rest of our lives. Which is why what we heard outside the tent that night was so much worse than anything that could have worn a face. It started around midnight. I know the time because I had checked my watch an hour before, unable to sleep, listening to the particular silence of deep wilderness that is never quite silence at all but a layered architecture of small sounds. An owl 3 ridges over, the creek diminished to a whisper in the cold, the settling of the fire we had let die down to coals. Then, beneath all of that, like a broadcast bleeding through from another frequency, our voices. Not voices like ours. Our voices. The specific, unrepeatable texture of them. My particular cadence when I'm reasoning something out, the way I elongate certain vowels, the habit I have of exhaling through my nose at the end of a sentence that I've never been able to break. Marcus's voice with its slight flatness on hard consonants, the way he drops the G on present participles when he's relaxed. Both of us talking outside our tent in the cold and the dark as though we had stepped out for air and simply resumed a conversation. The content of it was what finally moved the cold from the outside of my body to somewhere deep inside it. They were speaking the words we had exchanged that afternoon around the fire, our conversation about turning back, about whether the route was worth it, about the prints we had found and chosen to dismiss. Every word reconstructed perfectly, in perfect order, delivered in our voices with our rhythms and our pauses, the way you might play back a recording except that recordings don't breathe between sentences the way these things were breathing, don't shift weight on the frozen ground the way we could hear these things shifting. Marcus was already awake. He had been lying rigid beside me, I realized, for some time. His hand found my wrist in the dark and closed around it hard enough to hurt, and I was grateful for the pain because it confirmed at least one solid thing about reality. I reached for the zipper. He didn't stop me. Some curiosity is stronger than fear. The cold hit my face first. Then my eyes adjusted, pulling shapes from the darkness the way eyes do, finding contrast where the firelight's last memory still faintly orange lit the immediate camp. Two figures, standing at the tree line 40 feet away, their backs to us, both wearing packs, the exact silhouette of our packs, the compression straps, the sleeping rolls lashed below, even the small reflective tag on my left shoulder strap catching what light there was. They were walking slowly into the trees, not fleeing, not startled by the sound of the tent opening, walking as though they had simply decided it was time to go, with the dull, purposeful movement of something that did not need to look back because it already knew everything behind it. Marcus's mouth was at my ear. His voice was less than a whisper, it was shaped air, barely sound at all. Don't follow them. Those aren't us anymore. I understood exactly what he meant. I did not know how I understood it, but some part of my brain that is older than language, older than reason, older than whatever we mean when we say the word self, that part understood completely. We did not discuss it. That is the thing people find strangest when I tell this story, the part that makes them lean forward and ask, but what did you say to each other, what did you think was happening? And the answer is that we said almost nothing, because some experiences arrive already understanding that language will not help them. We broke camp in 12 minutes by the green glow of our headlamps, moving in the focused silence of people who have agreed without speaking that speed is the only intelligent response to what they cannot explain. The hike out took 4 hours in the dark. 7 miles of technical trail, route and rock and 2 stream crossings, the cold by then somewhere below 20 degrees and dropping. Neither of us fell. Neither of us spoke beyond the necessary. Step here. Low branch. Ice on the crossing. Functional language only. The language of physical navigation. Nothing that reached toward what was behind us in those woods, because some part of us understood, in the same wordless way Marcus had understood what to whisper to me. That the things wearing our shapes were still moving through the trees parallel to the trail, and that to speak their existence too plainly might be to invite some response. I want to be careful here about what I claim. I am not a superstitious person. I do not believe in easy explanations that fold strangeness into the familiar shapes of ghost stories. But I have spent a significant amount of time since that night thinking about the footprints, specifically about the implication of their existence. If the prints were in front of us when we began walking, then whatever made them was already out there before we arrived, already walking our route, already wearing our exact gait. Which means it did not follow us into the wilderness. It was not something the wilderness produced in response to our presence. It was there first, patient and precise, carrying the specific shape of us before it had ever encountered us. That thought has a weight I cannot set down. We reached the trailhead at 4 in the morning. The parking lot was empty except for our car, frost-covered, entirely ordinary in the way that ordinary things become briefly miraculous after you have spent time doubting the nature of things. We sat in the car with the heat running for a long time before either of us moved to drive. Marcus eventually said, "I think they wanted us to follow." I have thought about that too. The slow walk into the trees. The absence of urgency. The way they moved not like things fleeing but like things expecting to be joined, processing deeper into the wilderness with the calm confidence of things that knew how this was supposed to end. I think he's right. I think if I had stepped out of that tent and walked toward the tree line, if some other version of me, less fortunate, had given in to that pull, whatever waited at the boundary of the light would have turned around, and what looked back would have worn my face, but it would have already been finished with what I'd had inside it. We've never gone back. Some wilderness you leave only once.